We have come a long way from envelope, postage stamp, postcard, and now email. There is a fierce competition between Yahoo and Google's. Can you tell us that how far we will go and what new inventions are there in the way? And secondly, how can we use Google's for our next general election 2014?
So actually, I'm sorry. Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay. So by the way, let me explain. I'm hearing impaired, and so I'm trying to use your PA system to hear the questions. So I may struggle a little bit. I hope you'll forgive me. I may have to ask your help. So anyway, Google, you all understand that the Google system was organized to do one thing, and that was to organize the world's information and make it accessible and useful. Among the things that we've been experimenting with organizing is information of political interest. So we have a number of politicians who have been very interested in using the internet to communicate with their potential constituents, to get feedback from them. The White House recently announced a process whereby if you get enough signatures on a petition, 100,000 now, that they would respond. And they put themselves on the spot and said if there are enough people interested in the answer to that question that they will undertake to respond. It's also very clear, at least in the US, that President Obama has made very, very good use of these kinds of online systems, not just Google, but generally on the internet, in order to organize information to provide to constituents and also to communicate with them. Now, I have to tell you, though, that there was a very interesting experience as the internet became visible in the early 1990s. Politicians didn't pay too much attention until somewhere around 1998 or so. They suddenly recognized that it was a mechanism for getting information out to their constituents. And so web pages started showing up, blogs started showing up. Then they discovered that it wasn't just a one-way system, and the constituents were actually communicating back to them. I mean, it's a bit of a shock. And the consequence of this, I think, is a recognition that democracy is a two-way street, and that you can't just tell your constituents things, you have to be ready to respond to them as well. You know this already, I'm sure. So the internet has created a platform for this kind of political dialogue. It also, in a sense, has become a spotlight because it's very hard to hide from information that's readily and widely available to everyone. And so this spotlight, I think, is a kind of a transparency tool that creates accountability within the political system. I'm sure it could be better than it is now, but it is an inescapable fact that once information is available, it's very hard to ignore that. So I really see this as an interesting democratizing tool, and it's also an opportunity to create dialogue where dialogue doesn't exist. There are voices that could not be heard before that can be and should be heard to help shape policy. There's a mantra around my community about multi-stakeholder governance, and it's all about letting the people who are affected by policy to have something to say about that as the policy is being formed. And I cannot imagine a more important way of exercising democratic principles than to assure that those voices are heard. Thank you. I'll have to leave it to whoever is running around with the microphones. There's a gentleman here.
Hello.
And there's a microphone over there. So we'll have to do this in order of microphone arrival. Sir, yes, you're on, and then the next one is over here.
There's information and there's misinformation.
Yes.
So how does the internet is free, it's open, it's uncontrolled. How does one deal with this problem? Obviously, it raises many issues across the board.
It's a wonderful question, and I thank you for that. First observation I would make is that the internet is not the only source of misinformation. Movies, television, radio, magazines, the newspapers, your friends and your parents and your kids are all sources of misinformation, a lot of it not intentional. Some of it is ignorance, some of it is simply a mistake. Some of it's maybe deliberate. I mean, I'm sorry to say that in political terms, there's a lot of misinformation that's put out there on purpose for political reasons. So the question now is how to deal with that. The answer that most of us in my world have adopted is not to suppress the information, but to respond with more information. Now, the response doesn't necessarily help anyone unless you're prepared to take on a responsibility yourselves, and that's called critical thinking. That's called examining the information and deciding whether to accept or reject it, to ask questions about what's its origin, what is the basis for the assertions that are being made. Now, I think about people who have children and they worry about the internet. I do understand that there's content on the net that you would prefer the children didn't see. And there are ways of dealing with that. Google tries, for example, with filters that will control the content that comes back from a search, but you can adjust that. The edges of the net can be adjusted to say, in our case, filter everything out except that which we think is safe, or filter things a little less than that, or don't filter anything at all. So we call that safe search, moderate, and unfiltered. But the edge gets to decide that. I cannot imagine a better gift to every child than to teach them how to think critically. They're going to need it in education. They're going to need it in daily life. They're going to encounter content of all kinds from all sources. The internet makes it a little stark because you see, web page A with terrible information and web page B with incredibly useful information, and it's startling. And yet, the same problem exists in many other media. It's the critical thinking that resolves that, in my mind, by letting individuals decide. Parents can teach their kids, these are the family values, this information is valuable and this information isn't. And that's how I would generally approach the problem. So there's someone back there who just got a microphone. Okay. Yes, sir.
Mr. Cerf, you've been very generous in creating an incredible medium that you've done apparently for free, and it's wonderful to put that out there. But a lot of people who have manufactured original content, proprietary content, which are very upset with this medium, what would you say to them?
The people who create proprietary content.
People who make proprietary content, anything, music, movies, news, anything.
Okay, so first observation I would make is that not all the content that is produced by people is motivated by a pecuniary response. In fact, the thing that was most interesting about the advent of the World Wide Web is that this avalanche of information appeared around 1994 or 95, created by people who were not interested in being paid for it. They just wanted to know it was useful for someone else, and that's still the case. That doesn't mean that there aren't people who also produce information that would like to be paid for it. But the internet is this big tent, and it allows everything from public domain information all the way over to fully copyright protected. And so there is, of course, a problem because the people with the copyright protected material would like to keep it that way. And there are a variety of attempts to do that. So digital management, digital rights management for access to copyright material has been a mixed bag. And the reason is that it really interferes with people's convenience. And some of the producers of content have concluded that putting in DRM capability made the people who were actually willing to pay and wanted to pay so angry that they wouldn't buy it at all. And I'm not suggesting that we should abandon the protection of intellectual property, far from it. But I think we should appreciate that there is a fairly broad range of choices for the creators of works. There is something called Creative Commons, which my good friend Larry Lessig invented, which gives the author a wide range of choices other than just pure copyright protection. And I think we need to adapt to that. The other thing that is quite frankly the case is that once things are in digital form, it's pretty easy to duplicate and distribute them. This is just a fact. Think about the way the World Wide Web works. What does your browser do? It goes out to the net and copies a file, and then it interprets it. It's a giant copying machine. I guess anybody who's trying to create intellectual property is sort of terrified by that thought, but that's the way it works. So the alternative to being, to trying to replicate previous media control, you know, it's expensive to copy paper, expensive to copy DVDs, may be to reposition the business model associated with that intellectual property. iTunes is a frequently mentioned example of this, where Apple figured out that maybe people didn't want to buy an album, maybe they wanted to buy one track on the album, so why not let them and charge them 99 cents instead of $12 or 15 or 20. You can still buy the album if you want all of the tracks, or you can buy one track at a time. I don't want to overuse that analogy because movies, you probably don't want to buy one scene of. You know, mostly you want to see the whole movie. Similarly with books, you know, I'd like to read all the way to the end as opposed to, you know, up to the last chapter. But there are notions that will help you get past this. For example, subscription is a really interesting tactic. Every magazine in the world that has a subscription arrangement in it is trading on the fact that the subscriber believes the next issue is going to have interesting content. And I'm willing, based on brand or based on recommendations, to pay that subscription ahead of time in the expectation that I will get utility out of it. I'm not suggesting, again, that that's the only tactic, but I want people to think about business models that have to work and adapt into this online environment. I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm sitting here with this microphone, and you're sitting here without a microphone, and you surely must have an opinion on some of these things, and I've never known a politician that could stand being away from an open mic. So could I ask if you would like to respond to some of these too?
I'll interject if I do. I'm okay with not responding to that one, but if there's a question that I feel I can help with, I will.
Wow. Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, Mr. Mint.
Yes, go for it.
I am from academic fraternity. I am from Jamia Millia University. You have mentioned in one of the clips that is the massive open online courses. And you have also mentioned about the Khan Academy and Udacity and the Coursera etc. Can you tell us, elucidate a little bit about the utility of the internet for the academic purpose? Thank you.
Academic purpose.
Academic purpose.
So we got a little tiny bit into that with these MOOC things, this massive online open coursework. The Khan Academy was one of the first to burst on the scene with very, very simple, almost humble lessons that you could look at on YouTube. I mean, it's almost endearing to watch those lectures because you see how to solve problems, how to work problems. So a very interesting phenomenon happened after my colleagues did this big AI course. Stanford University's president, John Hennessy, is absolutely determined to find a way to make this large-scale courseware and course content widely available. And he wants Stanford to be part of that. MIT opened up their lecture material quite some time ago, and I remember somebody said, "Are those guys crazy? That course material is exactly why people go to MIT and pay a lot of money. So why would they do that?" And so I asked, I said, what motivated you to put all that course material up there? And they said, look, it's really simple. We show them what we've got. If they already understand this material, there's no point in coming to MIT. If they don't understand it, they realize they have to come to MIT to learn it. So, that was a pretty clever tactic. Now, something interesting has happened at Stanford. Not all the professors are really thrilled with this, MOOC stuff. But the ones who get it have decided to invert the normal classroom practice. They record their lectures. They're up on the net. The students can watch the lectures as many times as they want to, as opposed to asking the professor to repeat himself. So these students watch these things once, twice, 3 times, whatever they want. When they get into the classroom, they work problems. And the thing which is powerful about that is there's nothing more instructive than seeing how somebody solves a problem. The next best thing is to solve the problem yourself. And I have to say, solving problems is a great way to learn. Teaching people how to solve problems is a great way to learn. And I don't know about you, but I've been asked to teach classes that I sort of know something about. And I discover instantly when I try to teach it how little I actually know about it. So I learn more than the students do as a result. I think that the ability to get this high quality content out to a large population of users is a really powerful lever. Now, let me go away from the pedagogy for a second. What else can we do with these systems? One of the things we can do is allow people to collaborate more effectively. And at Google, we're big fans of sharing of content, sharing of databases, sharing of computing resources, working concurrently in a collaborative environment where multiple parties can see the result of a simulation, can see a presentation from big data and analytics from big data, and then can discuss, debate, analyze, and come to conclusions. So this is another engine for collaborative work. In the long run, one of the things I hope these cloud-based systems do is allow us to preserve our digital heritage for our descendants. This leads me to one final observation on this topic. It's called bit rot. Every one of us who uses application programs to create spreadsheets or text documents or reports or simulations and so on creates complicated files of data. And we store them away and we pull them back. And they are meaningful because the software that created them is available to us to interpret and present and allow us to interact. If the software goes away for some reason, the bits are like a pile of rotten bits because there's nothing you can do with them until you have access to software that can interpret it. This problem is already with us. You and I invest in the production of a lot of content, and if the application program doesn't work on the next version of the operating system, or the next version of the application isn't backward compatible, our investment in those bits is lost. I am very, very worried that between now and 2100, our descendants, 80 years from now, will wonder about us because most of the traces of what we've done in this beginning of the 21st century are in digital form and they will be lost. We can't let that happen. What we need is digital vellum. And it is not just a technical problem. We have to figure out what to do about intellectual property rights with regard to application software and the operating systems they rely on, so that when people go out of business, when they decide they don't want to support this software anymore, you can say, you must not allow that software to disappear. You must have a way of keeping it in operation so I can preserve the material that I built with it. So cloud systems may actually turn out to be a part of the solution, because you can imagine emulating the hardware that runs the operating system, that runs the application that interprets the bits. And so you may be able to preserve the ability to look at content that was created on earlier computers and operating systems. I have to tell you one more anecdote. I remember sitting in a room like this with a bunch of librarians, and we were talking about the bit rot problem. And some young kid gets up. That's anybody that's younger than I am is a kid, right? So anyway, the young kid gets up and he says, oh, this isn't a problem. The important stuff will be moved into other media and it will be mapped into the new applications and that will be fine. And the stuff that wasn't important will go away and no one will care. After he finished his speech, it took us a half an hour to get the librarians off the ceiling because they said, excuse us, but you don't know what's important and what isn't important. Some of it won't appear to be important until 200 or 300 years later. So they were emphasizing how important the solution to this problem is. And it's going to take the lawyers, the intellectual property people, the technologists, the librarians, and probably some others to figure out how to actually solve that problem. But solve it, we must.
Can I just add something?
Absolutely.
It's actually a roundabout question and an observation. You can look at a university as an institution that provides access to information. So that's one way of looking at it. And you can also look at it as an institution that excludes. Because not everybody can get to Harvard University.
Yes.
Or not everybody can get to Stanford, or not everybody can, in India, get to a university. So if you're a poor person sitting in a village in India, and you look at a university, one of the thoughts that goes through your mind is that that's an institution that actually excludes me, because I'll never get there. Right? And the reason it does that is because the university actually cannot scale. So Harvard University cannot go to 1 million students or 2 million students at the quality with which they can go to 2,000 or 3,000 students. What is going to happen? Well, okay, one other thing, which is that the university is actually a 20th century institution, or the DNA of the university comes from 200-300 years ago. The DNA, right? The physical structure,
Yes.
the courses,
Okay.
the departments, all that. What is going to happen 30, 40 years from now to this institution called the university? I mean, one step of the university is already in the corporate world. Another step is, sitting in Silicon Valley in the financial world. So is this structure going to explode? Or is this structure going to realign itself? And how is that going to work?
So first of all, do I remember correctly that the University of Bologna was founded around 1100?
Yeah.
So it's
Actually, Taxila-
it's nearly 1,000 years.
No, Taxila was more than 2,000, 3,000 years ago.
Wow.
Buddhist
Okay.
university.
So one possible answer to this question is that Darwin was right, and that you only have two choices in life: you either adapt or you die. And it may very well be that some universities won't figure out how to adapt, and that's why John Hennessy was so determined to figure out how to harness and make use of this new large-scale capacity, this scaling capability. Part of the scaling, by the way, comes from the fact that there are computer programs that can help you with evaluating the student progress and everything else. So one answer, almost glib answer, is that some universities will adapt and some won't. I think that the interesting question that has arisen is whether the university experience, which historically has tended to be of kind of a 2-year program, a 4-year program, maybe a 6 or 7-year program for advanced degrees, where you go, you're concentrated on getting a degree, and then you go into the workplace. This model is no longer feasible, nor is it even acceptable, especially in my world, in the high-tech world. The half-life of what you learn in a university in my world is maybe 4 or 5 years. I mean, I did my PhD in 1972. It's completely irrelevant to anything going on today. But the fact that we can get access to some of this content online, and we can do so at our leisure because we're not tied to a lecture schedule by the university professor, means that we can start delivering education in a different way in different units. We can have short courses, we can have certificate programs. People who are at work and need to learn new things can do so because they don't have to stop work and go physically to a university. So there is in terms of economics, not only do we have the residential students, young people who go to the university and are there for 4 years or 6 years or what have you, we also have this growing body of people who work who also need re-education. And that can be a new source of revenue for the university. So there could very well be that this restructuring actually opens up a bigger opportunity for revenue and therefore support.
But see, if you look at the university structure, when I went to university, you went to a particular university. You didn't really go for an expert, yes. Right? You went to Harvard University, you went to Cambridge University, and then you assumed that experts were sitting in there. Now you're shining lights on the experts. So what is going to happen is the power balance in the university is going to shift. The gentleman who runs that justice course in Harvard, Sandel, his power in relation to the university is completely different than it used to be. And if you can actually start giving access, direct access to these experts, will that superstructure of the university that controls them fold?
So you're asking an engineer a question and you almost deserve the answer. The university is going to have to adapt to that somehow. One thing we used to do when I was teaching at Stanford in the 70s, we would record all the lectures on tape, and then the tapes would actually be sent out to places all around the world. They would be played, and there was a person in the room who acted as the teaching assistant and helped students to understand the lectures and to do homework assignments and the like. A little bit of that can happen in this environment as well. One thing that I have to tell you, I think I mentioned to you when we were talking before, I visited 2 of the IIT campuses, and I also visited a campus near our offices in Hyderabad of IIIT, triple IT, a private university that was started 10 years ago with the considerable help of the state. This wasn't a federal action, it was a state. They provided land and buildings, and then they said, you know, good luck. And these guys built a university, and they don't have departments. What they have is institutes focused on particular problem spaces. Now, I have to admit that I haven't quite figured out how to connect these two, your point and this one, except that by eliminating the department notion and focusing on expertise, in my view, they've transformed the way we think of that institution and its structure. And it seems to me that your point, which I take absolutely, is that the structure of the university and its purpose may change from a hierarchical structure of departments and department heads and so on into an institution whose job it is to facilitate that brilliant lecturer to reach a larger number of people. And it's the facilitating effect that allows the university to generate its revenue. But as I say, I'm an engineer and not a businessman, so I could be completely wrong. But I bet you there are a bunch of businessmen in here that'd be happy to try to figure out the answer to that question. Okay, lots of hands are going up. Let's make sure we get back and forth. Where's the microphone at the moment? Is there one way up there? Okay, let me get the guys in the upper nosebleed section.
My question is to Mr. Gandhi.
Oh, this is for you?
I'm in trouble now. Yeah.
I am Virendra Singh from JNU. When I read the topic, the future of the internet, 1.2 billion empowered Indians, the first question which clicked in my mind, a few days back I was reading an editorial or some news was there in Hindu. It was saying that in some Indian government schools, some children who are even in the 8th class, they are unable to read or write 1 or 2 lines. Internet is a good thing and all, but it is a good thing for those people who are able to understand, who are able to write, read, and able to understand the data which is therein. How you are going to help those children who are not able to even understand 1 or 2 lines?
Can I ask you a counter question? How are you going to help them?
As a citizen, if I can give my 2 hours, 3 hours.
No, not as a citizen, as a young Indian. How are you going to help them?
Actually, please answer my question first, then I will answer you.
Try. How would you help them?
Actually, my question, if I had any answer, then I would have not asked you this question.
No, but give it a try. Give it a try.
Let me think. It needs. Actually, I thought a lot, but I thought that I don't have answer, so I should ask Mr. Gandhi.
I think I've traveled quite a lot in villages, and I've seen many 8-year-old children. I think the discussion we're having here is how do you allow kids in villages access to an education system, access to a good teacher, access to a good school. There are two ways of looking at access. One way of looking at it is incremental. I'll go back to, Sam is sitting here, so I'll go back to Sam. They could have looked at telephones and said, we want to provide access to every Indian over telephone, and thought about it in a linear fashion. They would have never got there. They'd be sitting here right now, still figuring out how to get phones to Indians if they thought about it in a linear way. You can also think about it in an exponential way. What they essentially did was they came out with something called a rural exchange. And you must have all seen the PCO. You've seen a PCO? And that humble PCO that today looks, ancient, is actually what gave you the cell phone in your hand. Because it suddenly opened up the system to millions of people. And it didn't do so in a linear way, it did so exponentially. So there are two ways of thinking about these things. One way is to think in a rigid way and say, why, how do we do this in a linear fashion? And another way is to do what Mr. Cerf did, to think in an exponential way. I asked him today, where did you think the internet would go? He said, I had no idea. He said, basically I knew that I was solving a problem at that point. And then suddenly the thing just exploded. So to say that the internet is not connected to the 8-year-old child, you're cutting off a very, very powerful avenue. We don't know how it's connected. Let's first try and bring them together. And let that child, let his aspirations catch fire. So I think and it's frankly not up to me to do it. It's up to people like you to do it. And you got to stop asking your politicians how they're going to do it. And start asking yourself how you're going to do it. Because that's how this country is going to move forward.
And that's why he's a politician and you're not. But I mean, look, this is a very important question to ask because we have to solve that problem. You remember Kennedy's famous speech, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
Hello.
And I would say...
I've got a person in my office who came up with a brilliant one on another one of Kennedy's speeches. He's going to laugh when I tell you this. We were having a presentation about self-help groups and poor women in my constituency. And Kennedy had said that a rising tide raises all boats. And he says to me, but sir, poor people don't have boats. and those who have the boats, their boats are tied to the bottom, anchored to the bottom. Anyway, sorry.
Okay, so actually there are some answers, by the way, to this basic question. One of them is to try to skirt around the illiteracy question, which is a serious one, by allowing people to engage in spoken interaction. And if you do spoken interaction and you show written answers also, you begin to gain knowledge of written language. We've seen this happen in the United States where captioned television was pushed by the deaf community, part of my world, And they really pounded the table on this in 1979. And the highest usage of the caption system was not by folks like me who are deaf. It was by people who wanted to learn English as a second language. And it was enormously helpful. So I mean, these kinds of ideas have a funny way of being used in ways that you didn't anticipate. And the internet is certainly a good example of that. This nice lady is waiting over here. I guess we should turn the lectern over to you.
Oh, hello, sir. Just one of my question. My question is related to his question, okay? And as you have told that we should stop asking the questions to politicians. But, sir, there is one question that as you have announced, sorry, you have not announced, but the government has announced. The government of India had announced, last year they had announced that they will give a tablet known as Akash, which was the cheapest tablet in the whole world. But in the past 1 year, how many students have got that tablet? So you are very good, you are optimistic, this is very good thing, but when this plan is going to come on the ground, can I have...
You know, frankly, I am not the person who's come up with the Akash tablet. You need to ask the gentleman who came up with it, and you need to ask him that question.
There are many people.
Yeah.
So can I respond also on this point? At any moment in time, some technologies are going to be too expensive. But the technologies that we're talking about have historically gone down in cost over time because their volumes have gone up and the learning curve has driven costs out. There was a time once when a mobile was a 6-pound piece of equipment. We call it a brick, and it cost $1,000. So physics is in our favor now. These devices and the communication systems and everything else are driving costs out, and they become more and more affordable over time. So I am very optimistic about this.